Welcome to the definitive UFO news show with me, your host, Mr. Rob G. It is going to be a fantastic show here this evening. We're going to get into talking about alien bodies. Where are the bodies, right? We have all these conversations about craft. We see the craft. We have a lot of proof of craft being present, but the question also always persists, where are the bodies? Where are the bodies? We're going to jump into that and a lot more here this evening. Let me go ahead and I know there's not a lot of people in here. I kind of just threw this show together at the last moment. And I want to definitely thank anyone and everyone who decides to show up here. We got Maggie M10 in the building. We got Kitty Catty Whack in the building. We got Miss Catherine Jones as well. So we got Kitty Catty Whack there. We got Maggie M10. Hey, Maggie M10. Appreciate you coming in. She'll catch the replay. Appreciate you being you, Maggie M10. Thanks for showing up. We got Miss Catherine Jones saying hi, Mr. Rob G. Hey, Miss Catherine Jones. Thanks for coming on in. We appreciate you showing up. We got Mel WD40, obviously getting us lubed up and ready for the show. That's how we're going to do it here this evening. And we're not going to mess around too much. I want to make sure that we kind of get in and get out on this. Few things that we have going on with the channel, restructuring some things. You notice we got some new looks and some new intros for this show. So we're kind of raising the bar as we always commit to do on this channel. And I got some other things on the pipeline as well that I'm working out. So should be some awesome stuff. Appreciate everyone's patience as we go ahead and get through this transition period here. Let me go ahead and start out with this. Where are the bodies? Where are the bodies? I think the conversation's being had, and I think it's being had well enough globally that we're all coming to the realization that these things are here. So I think we can all agree to that, right? I think the government stepping out and holding congressional hearings, this is plastered all over national news, which I'm just so glad of that being the fact. And, you have to, as far as people like us, right, that have been in this community for a while, we want the bodies. We're at the point where we're like, hey, where are the bodies? And I wanted to look around because my whole thought process is that if they are here, which we know they are, where are they at? Where are they at? A lot of people will say dark side of the moon, the back side of the moon. I think that's a pretty plausible place to look if I was going to look, being that the backside of the moon never actually ever faces Earth. So it's like, okay, if we were coming in as human beings and we were coming into some foreign planet that we figured had life on it, and we didn't want to kind of, be within the midst of that population, we would either stay in orbit, right? But then if that civilization is technologically advanced, they're going to notice something in orbit. So the next best thing would be to post up on the moon, and that's why that theory for me isn't so far off, right? I still would like to see proof because there's ways that we can, take video or get something up there that can take an image either way to prove it. So I would hope that steps like that would be taken. It's cool to talk about, but can we get something up there to kind of verify and validate that? Because if it's there, then let's say it's there, or let's cross it off the list. It'll be one of the two options for us. One of the things that I was made aware of that I didn't really think about, because when you hear people talk about bases on the moon, essentially, I think what people are thinking about is, a building on the backside of the moon that they've built. Someone brought to my attention recently that there are lava tubes actually on the moon. And I think that's actually pretty compelling to think about. Lava tubes on the moon, which would be natural, just as natural as they are here on the planet Earth, formed billions of years ago whenever this moon was formed. And these would be perfect places for not just these alien beings to hang out at, but if we one day, decide to do something on the moon and set an outpost there, these lava tubes or these natural caves would probably be, I would think, one of the first places that we would stop. So, with that being said, I definitely want to go ahead and get into our slides here and kind of talk to this here. I'm kind of playing with some new stuff here, guys. So, bear with me as we get through some of these transitions here. And first up, we want to go ahead and bring up the slide. So, okay, I want to make sure that we're framed properly here. All right, so we are. All right, so we're going to jump into this slideshow here. Obviously, you guys already know the routine here. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up the information here for those who may not be fully aware. We have the call-in number, as always. Make sure you go ahead and put this in your phones. That's 856-843-3444, or that is 856-THE-DIGG. If you're outside the United States, that'd be 001 first, then 856-843-3444, or that's 001-856-843, or the DIGG, rather, 001-856-THE-DIGG. Either way, lock it in your phone. You never know when you'll need to use it. You can call just to say hi sometimes. That's a cool thing to do. You can call, talk about your experience, leave your voicemail. You can text me at any time. You can send me pictures of something weird and anomalous that you have taken photos of. That'd be awesome, and I would love to show them on a future show here. As we go ahead and get further into the show and the presentation, I had to ask myself, and actually, I'll talk about this in a moment, but I want to make sure that we know that the memberships are still available here on this channel. Become a Social Soldier today. You'll find that in the description of today's video and any video that we do here. Also, what do we have here? We have the road to 1,000 subscribers. This is a big deal. We're trying to get the word out there, get people to come in and have the conversation. Come and join the conversation is usually how we position that here, because we have, conversations that I think at the very least you walk away from, and you have to use your brain. You have to think about some of the things that we talk about, some of the things that are positioned. So, and also with viewer input, it's always awesome to hear what you guys have to say. And today's going to be no different. Definitely going to love to hear anything that you guys may have to say on this subject. I'm sure everybody has an opinion on where they think the bodies could be. But I was thinking about it. What stops us from, as human beings, what stops us from taking that step to go find out where the bodies are, right? Why couldn't we on our own go to some of the places that we think these alien beings might be? Why couldn't we just show up there? Some of the places are top secret facilities, so we're not going to get in there, right? But couldn't we show up and kind of just at least let them know that our voices want to be heard as far as that goes? I would think so. However, if you have anybody who wants to join in on these types of conversations, being that there are a lot of new people coming into the UFO field as far as wanting to know answers, and we're looking for them too. So this would be a perfect place to come as we look for truth and transparency on our way to uncovering what the phenomena actually is. Let's go ahead and keep this show going. So this is, I think we're going to get into the show topic here. So where are the bodies, right? As far as we know, and we have it depicted here, if it'll show up here, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Okay, and the reason why I'm showing this, let me take a step back. Okay, we had a where's the bodies image here that I wanted to show you. Okay, but we didn't get it. Okay, so where are the bodies? You got to ask yourself these few questions. Just some things I was thinking about, as I was preparing to put the show together. I'm like, okay, first of all, do we even know that aliens can die? Are we even sure of that? Are we sure that they face mortality in the same way that we face mortality? It was one question I had, because there's a lot of cases that make it make sense. Obviously, there's things guiding these craft. In a lot of cases, some of these things are unmanned. I'm gonna tell you that. The UFOs I film, I feel like were unmanned. I don't feel like there were entities inside of these things. However, they did seem alive. but there are some of these craft that are taken that are manned, right? So you got to ask yourself, if they are biological like us, right? Then yes, they could die, right? They'd be susceptible to crashing and perishing in a crash. So that would be understandable. However, what if it's something that we don't understand? Could there be a flip side to it? They travel all this way to get here, right? And the big thing has been, okay, they travel all this way and then they crash when they get here. Now, I could still see that being the case, especially when you take into consideration that some of these things are probably not crashes, and in fact, government bringing some of these things down, and we've shown cases of that in previous episodes here, where I want to say it's STS shuttle mission STS 75, where it shows, I guess it's the camera from the shuttle looking out at Earth. Then you see this anomalous thing with glowing, pulsating object, plasma, or whatever it is, coming across the screen, and then it just automatically stops and shoots back the other way. As soon as it shoots back and changes direction, something comes up from the surface of the Earth through the atmosphere and shoots out into space. Now, was that, evidence of the government having something that they use to take these things down? I can tell you this. For me, it's even more compelling now that we know that they do fire on these things based on the Hellfire missile video that we had received. It kind of reminded me of something like that. Okay, there's been times where the government has fired on these objects. We have proof of that in that video. So it wouldn't be out the realm of possibility that also in the STS 75 shuttle mission video, that could have been the same exact thing. Not necessarily a Hellfire missile, but some sort of, device that we have built that allows us to take these things down. It makes a lot more sense that these things aren't crash retrievals most of the time, and likely they are being purposely brought down. But then you have to go into another part of this question. This is one thing I thought about, right? As far as travel goes and safety goes, think about us as human beings. We've been on this planet. We've been driving automobiles for about 100 years, a little over 100 years. Over that time, we have strived daily, yearly, to make sure the occupants of the vehicles we drive are more and more likely to survive through a crash and to survive on the other end of a crash, right? A lot of the technology, crash test dummies are used in those instances in order to, make sure that vehicles are safe and that you have the opportunity to survive. A lot better than automobiles were 50 years ago, where you didn't have airbags, you didn't have a lot of the safety features that you have now. So I'm just thinking, like, if we're so young in our, building vehicles and thinking, putting safety as one of the top paramount things to make sure that we cover, you'd have to think, would these extraterrestrials take the same approach? In the building, in the evolution of their travel, however it started, however it began, evolving into what they use today or the way they travel today, are safety mechanisms put in place for these things? You'd have to think so. And then, so with that being said, I would assume that they definitely have the ability to survive. If they are mortal, they have the ability to survive on some level, some sort of crash. I can't really obviously say what levels that they'd be, their safety precautions cover, but at the same time, just a basic crash, you would think that they're designed to, kind of live through something like that, you would think. So we do know, though, that air travel for human beings, we just haven't got there yet as far as being able to, guarantee safety of human beings once we're up in the air. And maybe it's the same thing for them. Maybe it's because gravity takes a hold and these things crash to the ground, and just something biological just can't survive that. There just isn't any real safety mechanism that's going to really save you in that instant. And so maybe that's why we end up getting bodies, or bodies to recover. Another thing, we all know that this started with, as far as we know, it probably happened before this for sure. But the main, and what I consider the modern UFO era, starts with Roswell, right? Roswell, which is depicted on the thumbnail of this video. That's July 7th, 1947, where there's a crashed disc that crashes on a farm in farmland. The government comes and examines the site and recovers the material. They state to the press that it was a crash disc. I don't know that they actually said they had bodies, though. I don't think that was a thing. However, they went right ahead the next day, July 8th, and said, "Oh no, actually it was a weather balloon." Okay, that's where it all starts, right? So the whole idea is everyone believes that the crash wreckage, and I think there's actually proof of this, taken over to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which we'll bring up here on the screen in a moment. So the rumor is that there were four beams that were recovered in the Roswell incident and taken to Wright-Pat Air Force Base. There's going to be a common theme here, right? Roswell, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, even though it wasn't called Air Force Base, I think it was like Army Airfield at the time. However, I'm going to read something to you here. So just a little history on Wright-Patterson. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio is huge. It is almost 30,000 people working there, as well as relatives and military personnel in the surrounding area. In other words, unlike other mysterious addresses located in remote places, the base is in a populated area. However, it is there that some of the oldest conspiracy theories reside. One of them indicates that the U.S. Air Force would have taken the UFO that supposedly crashed in Roswell in 1947 there. The place that was used to analyze the material is called Hangar 18, and the bodies of the aliens would be stored in the Blue Room, according to these theories. Wright-Patterson, however, has a real connection to unidentified flying objects. It was there that the U.S. Air Force developed the Sign and Blue Book projects that investigated unexplained aerial phenomena that emerged from the 1940s onward. So this is where they initially took the bodies. I don't know. I don't believe that they would still be there today. I think that they would have moved some of that stuff around. Crash retrievals, and we'll kind of get into how this all breaks down. Courtesy, and this is really coming off of the Age of Disclosure, right? Documentary that came out where you had Hal put off on there stating that there's at least two species of extraterrestrial. Okay, well, how do you know that? How do you know there's at least two species, right? So this goes into the whole potential idea that right around this time frame, right after this Roswell crash, as we talked about on a previous show, that there may have been, this is essentially when, these four potential beings that obviously this is what's stated, these four beings that I guess one of them survived up until 1952, where it eventually ended up passing away. And during that time frame is where you get the alleged meeting between extraterrestrials and then President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Let's go ahead and kind of get further into this here. And we talked about this on a previous show as well. So I want to make sure that we cover some of this stuff here. So the Dwight Eisenhower, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, supposedly had this meeting. I think it was it was in 1954 because he came into office in 1953 in January. He was inaugurated when a whole year before this alleged meeting happened. And we laid out some pretty good groundwork on that previous show. They showed, okay, when we now look back, the information on these incidents came out at different times. It wasn't known initially about bodies being recovered. It wasn't known immediately, potentially where the wreckage was, or the fact that there may have been this meeting between extraterrestrials and then a sitting president of the United States. This stuff all came out later, along with the Majestic 12 documents, right? Which a lot of people don't put any stock into. But we did sit down and talk about how, even though that information came out at separate times, when you go backwards and you look at the dates just line up for this to be something that potentially happened, right? As we search for answers, this is kind of, going down the path of what makes sense. What makes sense in this? So we had Dwight D. Eisenhower with the meeting potentially with these extraterrestrial entities. This information was handed over from then the president that preceded him, President Truman, who was in office at the time of the Roswell crash. So at the Roswell crash, if we're to believe all that happened, then he's the president when the bodies are recovered. He's president while they're holding this one live entity that lived from 1947 to 1952. That's 5 years of his presidency that they would have had access to this extraterrestrial being. Did it really happen? We don't know. This is just the information that's out there. But talking about making it make sense, I think is kind of the space that we're living in right here, is what makes sense, right, with the data that we have. So Truman apparently should have known about this because, we laid out a good case that the shadow government that we currently know today, the ones that are standing in front of and putting roadblocks in all the Congress's efforts to, get to the bottom of where the craft are and where the money, the black budget money is going, and who's in charge of these secret projects, right? We're getting people to step in the middle of that. And that shadow government hadn't been there forever. It hasn't been there forever. So there had to be an initial time where that shadow government was formed. And it likely, just based on information that we looked at, seems like it lines up with those Majestic 12 documents. And even if those documents themselves weren't authentic, the group that is controlling things behind the scenes had to be formed at some point in time. And the Roswell crash, if there was a recovery of a live being, it makes sense that you would be forming a group at that time, and that going forward, it would be a group that probably wouldn't share information with presidents going forward. However, being that it formed while Truman was in office, there wasn't any protocol, and I'm just thinking this through, right? There wouldn't have been any protocol initially to say, the president doesn't need to know this, because the president is completely in control of this thing that's being formed, right? And then the president that he hands this off to, which would be Dwight Eisenhower, would likely have been briefed, as the MJ-12 documents state that he was, on all of this information. It would have made sense that that's initially how they thought it should be handled, but then they realized that there's going to be more presidents down the line, and you just can't tell them all. So that's where you see the breakaway of this shadow government from having direct contact with the president and operating in their own space. That it just makes sense, right? So here's kind of what I was thinking, as I was saying earlier in the show. It would make sense, and actually, I think I have some of the documents here just for the people who haven't seen any of these. This was the document, the briefing document, supposedly, allegedly, for Operation Majestic 12, prepare for President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower. So this is apparently supposed to be the document that shows that the incoming president was informed of what happened. It makes sense that it would have happened that way, right? A lot of people are against saying there's reasons why this doesn't seem to be authentic. But the idea itself makes total sense that this would have been something that happened. So whether this document is authentic or not, I don't think really matters, because I think when you really look at it, we know that what we know as current shadow government had to be formed at some time in our history, and this would have been likely a great time for that to happen based on other things that were going on at the time. And the CIA was formed at the time as well, which we'll get into that because the CIA current day, if you watch Age of Disclosure, has been rumored to be likely playing a part still to this day in this whole situation. It gets pretty deep here. So we show these documents on previous shows, but I want to make sure for posterity and to kind of sew all this together that we show these here today. So however you feel about these documents, some people say just fake, not real at all. But once again, the idea that something like this would have taken place, even if these documents don't reflect the actual individuals who were assembled to be in this group, we know that it was done. We definitely know that it was done. So, moving on. So, here's where we go. If we put together, and this is where we'll start here, is where a lot of people say we should look. This is where a lot of people say we should look. Now, I'm just thinking, if we, as I said earlier, if we put together a group of individuals, if we said, okay, we're going to put together a team, me, you, and let's pick 15, 20 other people just out of humanity, and we had the means to visit these locations, where would be some of the locations that we would go look for these things, right? Because if they're presently here and alive, there are a few places, obviously, that we might want to check. There's been rumored, as you see here on the screen, aliens on Antarctica, which there's it's forbidden for us to even go there for most of us. Some people are allowed to go there, but it's forbidden for, the masses to be able to go there. And a very good reason that they use is that to maintain the pristine nature of essentially an untouched piece of land. When you think about everything else that's been trashed by human beings, it would make sense that you'd want to keep something like this pristine. I can get that. However, there are some people who believe that there are alien bases there. They believe that there are caves. There's a hole actually in Antarctica. There's a long list of things that people point to. They say the Nazis went there after World War II and they're still there today. There's just a lot of things that people float around. I don't tend to go that far with it, right? I'm more of a, hey, let's take it from a ground level approach. What makes sense? And I think just for starters, just think of as human beings, because at some point we will be the aliens approaching some foreign planet that might or might not have life on it. If we indicate that it does and we want to get a closer look, we will likely go to a place that's uninhabited on that planet. And if we find a huge body of land like Antarctica that doesn't have any human life on it or any alien life on it in the case that we be visiting, then we would likely go there first. If we were going to land somewhere on land, we would go to the place where there weren't human beings. And if you look everywhere else, on every other continent, there's signs of human life. So just as let's get a closer look, but let's not necessarily intermingle with the population, it just makes sense that Antarctica would be a place to go. So if we were to all board a plane and head to Antarctica, is this a place where we would end up running into extraterrestrial life, right? Because it's supposedly here. It's here. We have stuff coming in and out from space all the time, but then we have activity that makes it seem like they're not just coming and going, but they're also here, like most of the time, right? And there's a few different places where this could be. So we're looking at alive. Where could we find alive? If we went out right now, where could we potentially find alien beings alive right here on the planet. Where could we go? Antarctica would be at the top of the list. Desolate, like I said, they could sit right out on the ice, essentially, if they wanted to, and wouldn't have to worry about running into any human being at all, right? So it would make sense that that could be a place that you would go and find life. Now, there are some other places as well, right? Obviously, recently there's been in the news, and we've known this already, but for the new people coming in, they're seeing this story all over the national news, and they're like, wow, the fact that these things are being seen coming from in and out of the water. So we have underwater USO bases potentially, right? We don't have, I don't know if we have proof. We do have something that we'll look at here in a moment and we'll kind of read here, but we've seen them come in and out the water. You know, I've interviewed Kevin Day. We've heard Kevin Day talk many times on different programs, and he's seeing these things on radar coming in from 80,000 feet, which is essentially the limit of the radar. Can only look as high as 80,000 feet. So they're really coming from higher than that, which essentially says they're coming in from space, right? They're coming in from space, dropping down the seafloor, traveling down southward, and then being seen coming in and out of the water. Now, I don't have a clip here today, but there is a clip, and I played this before, that shows Lou Elizondo talking about some of the things that he saw while inside of ATIP. And he mentions an object being seen from the sky. He didn't state what platform saw this, but looking down in the Gulf of America, I guess that's what they call it, right? Gulf of America. Still call it Gulf of Mexico, but he saw this object looking down, and he could see in the frame one of those oil derricks. If you ever watch the movie Armageddon, that's the thing they're working on out there in the middle of the ocean, pumps oil, right? So an oil derrick, and he sees something bigger than that moving super fast going past it underwater, right? Watcher, and he actually saw, he was on a submarine, so he didn't see. He was on a submarine, and he tells his story about them calling fast movers some objects that were underwater, and the naval command called it a fast mover. Then he was trying to inquire more about what it was, and they pretty much snapped on him, right there, and wouldn't tell him anything, and kind of told him that he was asking too many questions, essentially, right? There's been cases where fishermen, if you've seen any of the recent reports, fishermen out in the middle of the ocean, and if you've been on the ocean at night, you could be in outer space and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's that dark out there. If you've been on a cruise and stood over the deck and looked out into the ocean and you can't see a single thing, you can't see the water except for right off the boat, but you can't see, if you look outwards, you can't see anything. Completely pitch black. So imagine being on a fishing boat in that darkness, and then all of a sudden lights from beneath you just light up your boat coming from underwater. Crazy stuff. So underwater is definitely, a place, and it's obviously one of the harder places for us to go. We haven't examined but 10% of the ocean roughly. And it's just not an easy place for us to go to say, hey, let's go catch these things where they're at, right? It's not going to be an easy thing to do as far as that goes. Now, there is a group of divers that have looked out in, I want to say it's Baltic Sea. And there's this anomaly. They discovered this years ago. I don't know. I've seen this and I've watched video on this. I don't know how I feel about it. except for when I listened to the testimony of the divers talking about going down there, and they dove down. This thing is, as you see here, 60 meters across. It's like 180 feet. 180 feet, that's like an 18-story building on its side, essentially. Imagine something that big. So they're down there and they're feeling around, and you can't really see much. But they, according to what they're saying this thing seemed like it was breathing, like there was a hole, and it seemed like it was breathing in and out, like either water or something, right? There was something coming in and out, is what they stated, right? And they want to go look at this a little further. There were also, which they say, Baltic Sea is over there in Europe. There's surrounded by a bunch of different countries. So one of the things that they point to is that there were like Russian ships out there and all these other ships that were keeping an eye on them. I don't know, they were kind of hinting that they were doing that because they also knew that this object was there and were keeping an eye on them. I could see that a few different ways, right? Those guys probably don't know if you're adversarial or not. There's internet cables and all sorts of oil pipelines and things that run under the ocean. So there's been things that have been tampered with down there before, in relation to warfare. So it could have been something like that. However, it doesn't take away the fact that this object was not and is not pretty strange, right? A lot of people, you would think it's I thought when I first looked at it, I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's volcanic. Maybe it's the way islands are formed, right? You have underwater volcanoes spew out some lava that hardens, looks really weird, it's uneven, but this thing had like right angles on it. And I think what really was making them take a second look at it, they determined by scanning it that it's a totally separate piece from, it's not part of the ocean floor. This is what they've determined. And we have some more images from that here. And I want to go ahead and make sure that we cover that. It's the Baltic Sea anomaly. And this was discovered a while back, but the Baltic Sea anomaly is a feature visible on an indistinct sonar image taken by Peter Lindberg, Dennis Asberg, and their Swedish Ocean X diving team while treasure hunting on the floor of the northern Baltic Sea at the center of the Gulf of Bothnia in June 2011. The team suggested their sonar image showed an object with unusual features of seemingly non-natural origin, prompting speculation published in tabloid newspapers that the object was a sunken UFO. A consensus of experts and scientists say that the image most likely shows a natural geological formation. So, they're still on the fence with that. Obviously, that's going to be a point of interest. It's somewhere that you'll probably want to go back and look. Let me see if I can get you guys a closer look of that, actually, as we speak to it. And so, yeah, it looks very strange, right? It looks like, to me, it looks like a classic sort of something that would be depicted in a sci-fi space movie, right? Where it's like all the little gadgets and features that they would include on something. But it's down there. It's down there, and it looks like that. That's what it looks like. So what can you really say to that? We just need to know more information. Now, is that the entrance? Is that an entrance to something underground? I guess that would be the point here of showing that, is could that be the entrance to something underground? Does it make sense that, with seeing these things coming in and out of the ocean in various places, could this be the entrance or, the cap to something beneath it, right? Because here's my thing. I just don't feel like these things are going in the water and they're just sitting on the bottom of the water, the bottom of the ocean floor. I just don't feel they're doing that. And I don't necessarily feel that they're just going in the water and kind of just hanging around in the water, right? I can't see it, right? And the only reason why I say that is because we have submarines. We have all these, a lot, not just our submarines, a lot of countries that have submarines out there at various depths. And if they were kind of just hanging around, I think it would be, and maybe they are. Maybe they are catching these and they're just not telling us. But I just wouldn't, if they're trying to be out of sight, I don't see them just kind of staying at 4,000 feet. Or I don't see them sitting on the ocean floor necessarily. So that leads you to feel like that they're probably going somewhere when they go down there, right? Still yet to be uncovered. And if we only know 10% of our ocean, we can't really say either way it goes what they're doing when they're down. And we don't know what, a lot of this biological life that's native to Earth is doing down there. We're figuring out new stuff all the time. They had a piece of Antarctica break off recently, and a lot of the scientists kind of immediately went over there, the ones that are allowed to go, went over there and discovered all sorts of new stuff, all sorts of new creatures down there while they had access. So, we're finding out stuff every day about our own things that we consider native to this planet. So it's no telling what these other things are doing once they go down there. Now, with that being said, they did talk about, obviously we have the Agua Dia of Puerto Rico video, which shows this object going in and out of the water, splitting into two. So we have that. We have evidence that these things are going from air into the water. We just don't know what happens when they go down there. There was a News Nation episode, a reality check episode recently where they talked about, they pointed out, because there's a lot of activity, right? I'm right here in California, by the way. I'm right here about an hour north of LA. So Catalina Island is about 140 miles, just as the crow flies from where I'm at here. And I had my weird experience here where I filmed 47 objects that disappeared in the middle of thin air. I talked to Caroline Corey, who filmed or who did the documentary Tear in the Sky, and I told her that the objects I filmed look a lot like what they found at the end of Tear in the Sky. And not very far from where I live is where they filmed that, and it just makes sense that those two things could be related. Now, why Kevin Day is seeing these things go down and head south and travel to this particular area, why Caroline Corey is finding these objects coming in through something that looks like a portal in Tear in the Sky, why are there so many other reports of objects coming in and out of the water in this particular area? Well, News Nation reality check, Ross Coulthard had a couple people on who were looking into that. They went ahead and dropped sonar down there, and they had found that there's a part of the ocean there where there's a cavern or crevice where the depth drops from a few hundred feet, I want to say, to like 800 feet. And they stated that there's likely, if there were going to be something that wanted to hide, that would likely be a place where it could go. We know the ocean is covered with all these crevices and canyons. If we have caves above land, there's caves below the ocean as well. The water just fills in certain places. If the water were taken away, you would see a lot of landscape like you see above water, it's just underwater, right? So there's going to be natural cave systems. Doesn't mean these aliens go down there and they build these, take material and construction items down there and build something that, in the sense that we think of building something, right? You could just inhabit something that's already there. It could be as simple as that, So this is, and you got to think about this, right? Because I think we're past the fact that these things are here. We know that they're here. We see them in the sky. There's so many cases and reports of, these craft landing on the ground and then beings getting out of these craft. And they're not just going home every time they leave. When they lift up and take off, they're not just leaving back to the place they originate from, unless they're jumping through some sort of portal to do so, and I think some of them probably are. But there's a lot of people that feel like there's something that may have, lives here right alongside of us full time. And if that's the case, where are they at? Right? If we were to go look, where would we find them? And I think these are a couple of places that we would definitely look at. I've talked about this before too, because obviously underwater is going to be, one of the main things that we could point to based on video evidence that we have. Another place we could probably go find. Here's some more information about the sea anomaly. I actually want you to get this visual. I borrowed this from someone on Facebook. This just gives you more of an idea of what the dimensions of this thing is, and it's just sitting down there. It's very strange. I'm not going to say it's not strange. It's definitely very strange, and should probably for surely be looked at more. But moving on, we have aliens in South America. Now, I've talked about this recently because I'm like, okay, there seems to be historically, when you go back, the Colares incident, you got the Pelicaris, you got the Nazca lines, you have a bunch of different incidents, you have a bunch of different tribal stories as well in South America of actual physical contact with extraterrestrials. And you have to ask yourself, in the Peru mummies, let's not forget those guys, because it seems like, as I said before, as much as we all looked at it initially, it was like, it's probably a hoax. I also said we should we should parking lot it and allow scientists to go down and look at it, because they will determine themselves if it's real or if it isn't. And years later, a couple years later here, we're still looking at it, and there's some evidence that is stating that it's real, likely, and that it's thousands of years old. So if that's the case, think of all that. The historic, references to extraterrestrial beings in South America alone. I'm sure it's like that in other places, but just pointing to South America, one thing that I found peculiar is that it's pretty close. If you look at the southern tip of South America, it's not very far from Antarctica. I think it's like the closest continent landmass to Antarctica is the tip of South America. And there's a lot of other weird things that happen down there, as far as the type of creatures that you find down there, just that you don't find anywhere else. But it would make sense that if extraterrestrials were finding that Antarctica was a cool place to kind of come in, not really be noticed, and say, hey, there's no human contact there, let's hang out here. And then they wanted to kind of branch out a little bit. South America would be the first place to go, is right there, right? And that could lead into why it's so rich in history when it comes to not just lights in the sky, but actual stories of physical contact, right? And then it kind of also, South America has a lot of forest, a lot of jungle as well. It's very dense. A lot of those areas are pretty dense. And so it would make sense that if you wanted to migrate, that would likely be the first place to move rather than trying to set up shop somewhere else, right? On land. So you got to ask yourself, Virginia, the Nazca lines, the Pelicares, the Colares incident, amongst many, in the Peru mummies, amongst many other things that we've heard about down there in South America. You got to ask yourself. Also, this is one of the big ones. And it only makes sense for me that this would be on another place that we could go look to. So aliens in South America. But not just South America, which I think definitely there's something going on there, but aliens in cave systems, right? The stories of the ant people and things of that nature, right? We have natural cave systems that were developed when the planet was going through its volcanic the changes as a young planet. There are lava tubes and all sorts of just natural cave systems that are all over the world. So if something catastrophic were to happen here on the surface of the planet, we would go underground, right? We have examples of people doing that current day. You have all the elites, the rich, building bunkers underground right now, structures underground, just in case something happens, right? If it happens, guess where they're going? They're going underground, right? Anyone on the outside like us who can't afford bunkers, if we want to be protected from whether it's solar rays or whatever it is, we're going to go also into these natural cave systems. That's where we're going to go. So doesn't it make sense that, if a civilization is living amongst us, if they had faced any sort of calamity in their history, which, as we know, there's been versions of humanity who have ascended to a certain point and then fallen off the face of the earth, essentially. Did one of those groups go underground? Have they been underground so long that it isn't viable for them to come from underground, right? If you're in darkness in that sort of atmosphere, it's wet, it's the conditions are different down there. Imagine if an asteroid hit the planet, hopefully it doesn't, but imagine that it did and you couldn't live on the surface for about 1,000 years. And you had to stay underground for 1,000 years. The, the evolution of human beings over that 1,000 year period might not permit for you to come back out to the surface, even when everything is okay. So you got to think about that. Is that something that could have happened to something else that was living there at some point? They went underground. They were there for so long that it's not viable for them to come back out to the surface. It makes sense. And there's a show that I watch on YouTube. There's these two cave guys, young kids, and they go into all these vast cave systems. And you would be amazed how far these things go in. We're talking about miles and miles in. A lot of times these guys have to turn around and come back so they don't get lost. But it is amazing how deep and vast these systems are. Is it possible that, if we were to travel in there and we had the means to kind of stay in there as long as we could, would we find something the deeper that we went in there? It's just a question you have to ask yourself. Because if they're here, then they have to be in one of these places that we're talking about. If they're here on this planet with us, they have to be in one of these locations. So, we're at the point where we know the craft are here. We know there's things in these craft. We're kind of like, where are the bodies? Let's get this show on the road. Let's that we're going to do this contact thing. Let's go ahead and do it and then figure out where we go next, right? That's kind of where I'm at with this. So, with that being said, this also goes into not just with the cave systems, but people talk about the deep underground military bases. It makes sense that these cave systems, these deep underground military bases, is going to be something that is going to be somewhere where you're going to find the dead ones, because we're moving now from the alive extraterrestrials into where would we find the bodies, like the recovered bodies. And I'm really feeling like underground military bases is going to be one of the main places that we would look. And let me go ahead and get us into a little bit of that. And I'll explain why here in a moment. So, deep underground military bases. If we put together and dispatch search teams to locate the bodies, in this case, ones that are no longer alive, where should we focus? Are the bodies in the craft at the same location? That's kind of one thing that I wanted to touch real quick. Because if we're to believe, that these things are being captured at the same time, we're getting the craft, we're getting the bodies. Well, we know the craft are being sent to a somewhere where they can, potentially work on reverse engineering. We know that. So likely going to a government contractor, but where are the bodies going? And we talked at the beginning about there being a recurring theme here, which is the United States Air Force. We know that they've been silent on this entire issue, and they have not said anything, since Lou Elizondo came out in 2017, since the New York Times article dropped. There have been zero, absolutely nothing that has come out from the United States about the subject. Not a yay, not a nay, not anything, not a word. And then you have to ask yourself why. Obviously, going back to the beginning of this conversation, where we talk about where was the potential first body retrieved at, if we're to look at the Roswell, it went to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, right? And then the Air Force has been an integral part of, I believe, the retrievals ever since then. And I would gamble to say that the bodies themselves are being held specifically by the United States Air Force. If I were to take a guess at that, obviously I can't walk into one of these facilities. I wish I could, because there's a couple on my list that I would choose to go to try to verify this. But it's process of elimination, right? Process of elimination, and I think it really all points to, and a lot of people agree with this, that it points to the United States Air Force. Now, we know they have underground bases. We are now putting extraterrestrials and UFOs aside. We know they have underground facilities. We know Bob Lazar came out in '89 talking about Area 51. We had the President Obama come out, I think in like 2013, and actually confirm the existence of Area 51. And they're not just working on the surface. So the buildings and the things you see on the surface, that's all to those facilities. It would make sense that they would have at least one lower deck beneath the surface. There's evidence of it in other cases, and in places that you could point to where there's a basement or something that resides underground, right? So who's to say there isn't something beneath that, and so on and so forth. Now, as far as it goes, and what they depict on television, obviously we can't say that, but it makes sense that this would be where the bodies are being held. If you're thinking about the entire landscape of who would be involved, and it only points to the United States Air Force as being the ones that would be holding on to the bodies. So not only that, but the governments would allow the contractors to play with the spaceships, with the retrieved craft. They definitely wouldn't hand over bodies to the contractors. I think we could all agree on that. If you want to believe Michael Digna, who spoke at the Disclosure Project, the one Stephen Greer did a few years back, where he talks about coming across these beings on base and very near military installations. So I'll admit that I wasn't always on board with the fact that these things are just walking around bases and things like that. Like you're just gonna be on base and then come across one of these things walking around. I didn't see or understand that and see how that could be plausible. But we talked to, I want to say it was Mary Rodwell last week, and just putting it out there that there potentially is a species of extraterrestrial that looks like human. Okay, I could see that. Then I could see human beings working alongside of extraterrestrials that also look like human beings. It just would be an easy situation to work in. I could see how that could be possible. So if we're talking about that, then that's where I can see these things maybe working side by side, and maybe they have something going on there. But but with Michael Digna, and then Jason Sands also tells the story of coming across extraterrestrial being on base as well. So that just gives you the base connection to potentially extraterrestrials, right? Which just goes further to say is likely also the place where they're doing anything related to extraterrestrials. Let's just put it like that. So Area 51, for those who may be just coming into this subject new, you kind of know about it, you saw it in a movie or two. But Area 51, its airspace is prohibited. It prevents you from photographing or filming the base in detail, and trying to invade its perimeter could mean your death. The government is authorized to shoot to kill if necessary, also known as Groom Lake, or Area 51 went unnoticed by the public until satellite images identified it in the middle of the state of Nevada. The U.S. government did not even recognize it, but today it is known as a part of Edwards Air Force Base, where several advanced aircraft tests were carried out after World War II. It was only in 2013 that the CIA recognized it, but its purpose was never clarified. It is true that the development of secret aircraft such as the U-2 SR-71 and F-117A were among the main objectives. However, such mystery-fueled theories about UFOs captured and studied at its facilities, which have always been denied by the government and many ufologists. Area 51's main task is to reverse engineer captured craft in an attempt to acquire technical knowledge. To this end, it is believed that the base is not exactly the location of these secret activities, but rather underground structures to the south called S4, where the most complex studies would be carried out. So I don't think they're doing anything big there, Area 51. I think it's, just like they said, it's an extension of Edwards Air Force Base. And as we talked about here, and I think we'll be able to show it here in a minute, but there's a point of interest on the edge of the main Edwards Air Force Base, which is in Mojave, about 40 miles from where I'm at right now. And there's a place there, or a section of the base called Plant 42, and we've talked about this as well, where just so happens on this part of the base, you have Lockheed Skunk Works, you have Boeing, you have Northrop Grumman, you have Madonna Douglas, and you have NASA. They're all there on this small part of the base, and this is where people believe, a lot of these, a lot of the government secret projects come out of, as far as like I think the latest one was the B-21 Raider came from there, and then amongst other things as well. And would be likely another place where, at least if not just the reverse engineering aspect going on there, because obviously these are the contractors, but Edwards Air Force Base itself potentially being maybe somewhere else on this base where they're actually also examining the bodies. That could make sense, right? Being that all the black projects likely are being done at this Plant 42 facility, and so somewhere else on the base is, on the under control of the actual Air Force and not government contractors, would be where the bodies are being held. Either way it goes, like I said, it's only about 40 some odd miles from where I live here in Southern California, and I plan on going there at least to film. You can get right outside the gate and take images of the building, so I intend on going to film and then doing some more stories about it after that. But you have another place as well. I'm actually going to bring this up here. You have Area 52, which is in Utah. A lot of people, now I know it's a bombing range, but I don't know that that's where they're holding bodies. It's just another Air Force uh, facility that is kind of top secret, not really saying much about what goes on there. A lot of people call it Area 52. I don't know that I'm sold on that. But then you lead into the Dulce, New Mexico underground base, which is was brought out by, I think, Paul Benowitz. So I'm going to go ahead and read that here. The Dolce base is subject to conspiracy theories claiming that a jointly operated human and alien underground facility exists under Archuleta Mesa near the town of Dolce, New Mexico, in the United States. Claims of alien activity there first arose from Albuquerque businessman Paul Benowitz. Compared to stories about Dolce, Area 51 seems like just a fairy tale. Supposedly located near the city of the same name in the north of the state of New Mexico, almost on the border with Colorado, the hypothetical secret base came to light in the late 1970s when a ufologist, Paul Benowitz, claimed to have identified communications between aliens and the U.S. military in the region. The evidence would be in mutilated cattle in the region and in the constant unidentified sightings. The alleged base would be an underground complex with 7 floors where the U.S. government would experiment with hybrids of humans with animals and aliens with humans. The stories about Dolce border on nonsense. The battles between ETs and soldiers to third kind contacts with, quote, smelly aliens, although you do hear about the ammonia smell and the sulfur smell from a lot of different cases. So even the location of the base is curious. It was located underground in a coal fire power plant. Benowitz was considered paranoid even by other ufologists, but the author of the book, Keep Out, added some rather curious information on the subject. Nick Redfern said in an interview a few years ago that the FBI released information about these cattle mutilations that have been secret since then. A few kilometers from the alleged location to the base, the American government detonated a 29 kiloton nuclear device in 1967, about 750 meters underground, with the intention of releasing natural gas for production. According to him, for this reason, no one in the region could dig underground without authorization. So you have the what's rumored to be an underground alien base under the Archuleta Mesa for the Dolce underground base. And then we have a friend, Melinda Leslie, who does the Skywatch tours out in Sedona, Arizona. And there is a mountain there in Sedona that she has filmed plenty of, military activity, and what appears to be Ross Coulthard puts his stamp on this too and says he went out there himself and saw what appears to be these orbs coming up, raising up, and then these helicopters kind of escorting these orbs. So, which is showing apparently some sort of human extraterrestrial working together, right? Where, okay, this is where you can find extraterrestrials, the ones that are here, working here, or kind of interacting with human beings here on Earth. This is what the information is out there, right? So to kind of understand this a little bit more, this was a visual that was I grabbed from the Age of Disclosure, and I think everyone should probably have a copy of this, but it just lays out. And for me, it felt really cool to be able to have this graph here because you hear it talked about all the time, the legacy program, but to see what lies beneath that, I think is really the key, right? And once again, they laid this out in the Age of Disclosure documentary film. So if you haven't watched it, you should definitely go see everything that was said in it, right? A lot of people saying things, some from the government, and I think it's for sure something that even if you're new to the subject, you should watch it, amongst other things. But this is definitely one I would say to try to make sure that you watch. But they listed the CIA as being at the head of this, which, once again, as we go back in time, it makes sense because they were established right there in the right around 40, I think in 47. If I think it was that year. So, but if not, it was right in that same time frame when apparently this secret group, who we know is effective today and working today to put roadblocks in front of Congress, that in these bills and things we're trying to get passed to for government disclosure. We know that that group exists, and we have evidence that likely it was formed back at the same time, which would make sense on why them presenting the CIA as the head of this makes a lot of sense, and that the CIA is interacting with all these other foreign governments. We know foreign governments are also in the same boat that we're in as far as retrieving craft, and then likely also retrieving bodies, and maybe being the go between these countries. In crazier things have happened, but it makes sense when you lay it out, right? It makes sense when you lay it out. So the CIA being at the head of that, the Department of Energy, obviously in the name itself, being interested in whatever the government contractors find when it comes down to examining these crash retrievals and trying to figure out, what we could derive from them. Seems like the Department of Energy would be right there, likely working with them directly. Makes total sense. And then that leaves a little old Air Force on over there by themselves, who because of their silence, their just complete silence during this whole thing, just is guilt, right? It's guilt. I don't think you can look at it as any other way, right? Obviously, they work very closely with NASA. We know NASA never sees anything, never actually sees aliens, or never sees anything weird coming in from space. Everything's normal if you leave it up to NASA. We know they work closely together. You'll find NASA on pretty much all their facilities are on Air Force bases around the country. So we know they're working together. And if you ask me, that's likely where we'll find the bodies. And I talked to you earlier about Plant 42. This is, I'll keep talking about Plant 42 until I think this is going to just remember Plant 42. Just remember Plant 42, the name, because I'm sure down the line we're going to be hearing a lot more about Plant 42 specifically as we start to zero in on where the stuff is, who has what, I think this is part of the next conversation. So remember this. And as you can see here, and I'll go ahead and bring this up on a full screen if I can. But you have, as I said before, Plant 42, you got Boeing, Lockheed Martin, all next to each other. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. You got another building with Lockheed Martin down there at the bottom. You got NASA as well. All these guys right there on a small part of this base. If you start looking around within the UFO community and you start looking into where people think the crash retrievals are being reverse engineered, they will point you, some of them at least, will point you to this location, Plant 42. And I think it's very interesting, and it's stuff that we all should know because, yes, we wait, or I don't, but I know a lot of people wait for the government to find out who has the stuff. That's kind of what we're at. If you just were waiting for Congress, then you're kind of waiting for them now to get to the point to where they have inquired about where the stuff is, and then they're telling us now we're getting the information where the stuff is. We could kind of circumvent that and kind of bypass that step just as us and go show up at these facilities. Now, obviously not trespassing or doing anything silly like that, but just making them aware, like, hey, we know you guys got the stuff. Like, show us the stuff, right? At least admit you got the stuff. We know that the stuff is likely here. We've deduced through going through all this information that the stuff is likely here. So how about we take a moment and see the stuff? Let's get just at least, you don't have to give super details, but let's at least get to that point of confirmation, right? Because I think we're there already. I think we're there on the bigger stage as far as, the people who have been in it for a while and all the places that the historical researchers have covered and been leading up to kind of what we're doing and looking at today. I think we're at that point where we could finally sit down and say, yeah, we do have craft. We're trying to figure some stuff out. We don't really know what we're doing with it, but yeah, we do have some weird stuff that we've retrieved. I think at least that conversation is pretty cool to kind of at least open the door on what it is that we're talking about, and kind of just to go over for what I was thinking here. And let me just go back one slide here. So what I written down here, CIA's the puppet master. This is kind of what they allude to in the age of disclosure. The United States Air Force likely has the bodies, uh, or the United States Air Force, or the USSF, the Space Force base, likely also underground. Department of Energy likely works alongside the government contractors on propulsion, reverse engineering, government contractors. Once again, as we go back here to Plant 42, and I thought Raytheon was on this list, but I don't think they are. Or at least they're not listed here. But let me read something about this Plant 42. Not all official secret bases are in remote areas. One address is particularly interesting in the United States. It's Plant 42, an air base in Palmdale near Los Angeles, which is responsible for building most of the advanced American aircraft. Manufacturers themselves still use facilities there to finish their projects, such as Northrop Grumman and Skunk Works, the advanced design arm of Lockheed Martin that created famous aircraft such as F-117A fighter and SR-71 Blackbird spy plane. The most recent secret aircraft from Plant 42 is the Northrop Grumman B-21 Raider stealth bomber. There is a saying. There is a saying about Plant 42, and what it says is, "What flies in Area 51 is built in Plant 42." So I wanted to make sure that we go ahead and get that out there as well. Also, like I said, you had there's just a lot of things that point to this being a place where the reverse engineering is happening. And if it is, here's the other part, right? When we talk about this is Lockheed Skunk Works also on this location. Well, famously, as we talked to good friend Jim Goodalls, he talks about how Ben Rich, who was the president of Skunk Works at the time, was stating that we have the tech to take ET home, right? And we've debated on what that could mean. It could mean that they've reverse engineered it, or I feel like it could also mean that it simply means that they have retrieved the craft, which means technically they're in possession of tech that could take ET home. So either way you go on that, can validate that statement. But I think the thing to take home with that is Ben Rich was president of Lockheed Skunk Works, which was here at Plant 42, which further goes to say that they definitely are reverse engineer or doing the craft retrieval stuff there. And then likely what else is going on, right? So I think that validates all of that. And my whole thinking of, as we go ahead and get ready to get to the end of this, okay, we're going to get ready to wrap this up in just a moment. But my question still that I would have, because you still got to think outside the box when it comes to any of this. You can't just, be leaning one way and not the other. You kind of need to really stay in the middle of the road, especially when trying to get to answers, right? Because if you're leaning one side or the other, well, you've attempted to answer your own question, which is likely incorrect, because we simply don't know what it is that we need to know about this phenomenon. We're learning every day, which is why we get together on shows like this and have these conversations, because we're trying to talk our way through this. We're trying to figure out what makes sense and then back it up with things, data that we end up getting along the way, along with historical data, which is key and important in the conversation. But as I wanted to kind of do a devil's advocate, I was just like thinking about the crash retrievals. I was like, wouldn't ET rescue teams immediately dispatch for bodies and survivors? So in the event you had a ET crash, if it was just them crashing on their own, or even, I guess, if the government attempted to bring them down, isn't it likely that they would immediately dispatch another craft to go and pick up those bodies, living or dead? Wouldn't you think that they would immediately send off another craft because they're here, right? And it wouldn't. They'd probably get there quicker than a recovery team. And so, James Fox talks about that being the case in the Virginia case on Moment of Contact, where it is seemed like when the girls came across this extraterrestrial in the backyard, kind of cowering and bent and hover, kind of hunched over, that it appeared that another craft came doing like a searching pattern, attempting to search for its members, which makes sense. That's what we would do if we lost one of ours on Mars. Whenever we get there, we're going to send a craft to kind of go look for them. This is what we're going to do. So it just makes sense. And it just, I have to think that, is it more likely that we don't really always get bodies with these craft because they have, excuse me, because they have come and retrieved the bodies ahead of time because they get there before we do? It would make sense. It would make total sense. And when we talk about, there's people that talk about, some of these craft have been given as gifts where you get there and there's no one on the scene. And could that be the reason? Couldn't that be what explains that? Is that because the ETs that were there when the craft went down were rescued by another craft, and then there just wasn't anyone on the scene by the time the recovery teams get there, and therefore to the recovery teams it appears that this was gifted to them. Well, no, they just came and got their buddies and got up out of there. That would make more sense, right? And then couldn't we as civilians, don't we have the right to, if our tax money is being spent on these projects and the things that these government contractors are doing to reverse engineer, couldn't we as civilians show up outside the gates and just ask questions or at least want to know more, right? As long as we don't show up outside the gate, what position do they have? What pressure are they under to talk about any of this or release any of this? No one's at the gate. No one's, the government likely is being roadblocked by whoever is between them and these contractors anyway. So they're not getting the pressure from there. So where are they getting the pressure from? They're not getting the pressure from anywhere. So shouldn't it be something that we consider doing as human beings that are trying to find out the truth, because this is something that affects us all as human beings across the globe, whether it's free energy or whether it's just the realization that we're not alone in this universe, things that we should know, if the information is there, if the pressure isn't actually coming from the government because of the roadblocks that these, people in the background are putting up for these congressmen, and you're trying to take the appropriate channels to get this information released, and it's not going to happen because of that, then it's up to us to do what we can, right? Which is why I will be doing some filming over at Plant 42. It's not trespassing, so there shouldn't be a problem with me doing that. And yeah, and that's what I put here. If the government want to apply pressure, couldn't we as humanity make it a little uncomfortable? Yeah, I think we could. That's about where we're going to end the show, though, here today. I want to make sure we went ahead and talked about where are the bodies. Because if they're out there, we should be able to go and see where these things are, right? We should be able to do this. And I think we can. When you think about doing it as an individual, it seems like this momentous task. But when we get together and we form like this group, right? Like any other cause that gets recognized and addressed throughout humanity's history, it usually takes a group of individuals. It's never one person by themselves. It's the power is in the group. And so maybe this is something that we formulate and maybe make it a thing, right? The same way Congress, we were contacting Congress in the beginning to, advise them to have hearings, and then now eventually we have them. So maybe this is another grassroots effort that we could kind of get going ourselves. With that being said, we're going to get ready to shut it down. It's been a great year. I want to do a year in review show, but I thought this was awesome. I saw Steve Bassett post something in it. We've talked about going into this new year and looking at the things that we know are going to happen that we have to look forward to. One of them was the Steven Spielberg movie that we know is coming. And guess what? Steve Bassett took this picture in Times Square, New York. So it is not just conversation at this point. We are getting the movie. And let me full screen this for you guys. Right in Times Square, right on the corner, biggest day. This poster, what I guess that's what you call this. And it says, or here I put Steven Spielberg's new movie being promoted in Times Square, New York City. And what it says, you kind of can't see it really from the side. It says, all will be disclosed. Spielberg, 6/12/26. And I'll give you a closer view of that. All will be disclosed. Spielberg, 6/12/26. That's 6 months away. That's not long at all, guys. We're going to be getting into that. I want to do a show on this, and we're going to definitely do a show on this here because I think there's some things we could talk about there. And once again, guys, this has been the show. So I do appreciate everybody coming on out for this episode of the Definitive UFO News Show. There's going to be some changes going on here with the way that this is formatted. As you see, we're going through some visual changes and some behind-the-scenes changes here. But there's also some things that I'm working on as well. I'm a one-man team here. So as I'm working in the background to get these things converted and changed over, just please be patient with me. A lot of good stuff is on the way. Make sure that if you're watching this for the first time that you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment as well because it just helps YouTube. YouTube wants to know that the people that watched either liked it or they interacted with it by leaving comments. So it's very important that you do that with any show that you watch out there that you like or that you appreciate. And this is no different here. So I do appreciate you guys coming on in. What else do we have here? Road to 1,000 subscribers. Seems like a meaningless milestone, right? Something really small. A lot of people are blown past that. But we're on the road for 1,000, and we're going to get there eventually. So make sure anybody out there that you think would be interested, maybe they're just coming around to the conversation, this is the perfect place to have them come because I think we approach things from a truth and transparency level. And we will, we lean on history a lot. You get a lot of that here. And I think this would be a great introduction place for people just coming into the conversation. So I'd appreciate you guys sharing with friends and family that are coming around that corner to getting into this topic. And I do want to thank Kitty Catty Whack out there for being awesome, showing that, dropping a super chat on us tonight. Thank you so much. Appreciate that as well. Also, memberships are available. You can find the link for that in the description. The social Discord is open. It's been open for a while. We're going to be part of the getting things behind the scenes done is we're going to be more active in that. There's things I want to do in there, movies and things like that. I'm trying to figure all that out. So once again, one-man show, getting all this together. Appreciate your patience on all this, guys. We're going to be getting into some real good conversations soon. Let me see, what else do I have for you? The phone number, definitely put this in your phone, 856-843-3444. That's 856-THE-DIGG. If you're outside the United States, dial 001 first, then 856-843-3444 or 001-856-THE-DIGG. It has been a pleasure, guys, hanging out with you tonight as your host. My name is Mr. Rob G. This is the Definitive UFO News Show. I'm going to go ahead and get up out of here. Go have some dinner. You guys do the same. Take care of yourselves. Love each other. And I'll see you next time. Sooner than you know. I'll see you sooner than you know. Take care.